Welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at gods5minutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. The 24th chapter of 1 Samuel gives us the story of how King Saul relentlessly pursued David, whom he dreaded as having been ordained by God to replace him as king of Israel. How David escaped by hiding with his band of outlaws in a cave, while Saul and his posse camped just outside. How David came out in the night, not to slay, but to slice a piece from Saul's clothing as he helplessly slept, and then called to him, "My father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee, yet thou huntest my soul to take it." When David spoke to Saul, the king was alone. David could have easily escaped among the hollows and cliffs of that broken land, but when he woke Saul, he risked capture if the king called to his men. Nevertheless, the warm gush of his ancient friendship to the man shines through this chapter. His words to Saul contain no reproaches, no hate, no anger. David will not even presume to judge the king's heart in his decision to waste resources and time hunting this innocent man, but assumes he has been misguided by the lies and calumnies he's been told. But David also points to the scrap of cloth in his hand. Here's the ultimate proof that he has no self-aggrandizing dreams for Saul's throne, for even his devoted warrior band had tried to tell him this amazing opportunity to avenge himself on sleeping Saul and rid the nation of his increasingly reckless reign with one blow must have been the hand of God. They think David would be frustrating God by letting such an opportunity slip. How disgusted they must have been when the blade of David's hand flashed in the dim light and then, instead of plunging into Saul's great back, only sliced away a flap of his garment. Despite their inability to see the nobility of their great outlaw leader, the fact is such an action would have disqualified David from the lofty future before him. God doesn't want his soldiers wading through the blood of their opponents to reach positions and ranks. When David at last pressed his dying pillow, among his last sentences, where the God of Israel said, "The rock of Israel spake to me, he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God." David rather was not capable of slaying a sleeping fellow countryman, even as vindictive a one as Saul had shown himself to be. There was no personal animosity in David. In his address to Saul, he called Saul father. He spoke of himself as a dead dog, which is completely harmless, and as a flea, which is so hard to catch. Finally, he told his men he did not dare touch the man God had anointed by the same prophet who poured the same kind of oil on him. "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed." It was this sweet nobility, among other things, that made David a man after God's own heart. This ancient man of God set an example fit to last through the centuries of how we ought to deal with slanders and enmity. 1,000 years before Christ stood on a green mountainside overlooking the Sea of Galilee to call us to bless them that curse us, David had grasped eternal principle. He showed as much by forgetting the harsh privations of the outlaw life in the warm glow of his remembered love for his king and respect to the calling God had given Saul. To repay evil with benefits, to abstain from retaliation when it is in our power, to keep our tongue from bitter and wounding words, to appeal to the adversary's better self, even at the cost of our own dignity. None of these things come easily to the person who lives in the spirit of Cain's carnality. David's Lord, when he suffered, threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously. We are poor followers of him if David surpasses us in patience and generosity. A new heart creates in us a gentle gospel to cause us to not deal in scorn and hate, but rather kindness. Have you talked to God today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at godsfive-minutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.
The The world is in chaos. You're here for a purpose. What does the Bible have to say about it all? I'm Mark Taylor, host of Crosspoint podcast and radio show, and I'd like to invite you to join me each week as I navigate the complexities of faith, culture, and personal growth. Each week, I interview a different guest who is making an impact on the culture for God's kingdom. Whether you're seeking spiritual guidance, true information, or a fresh perspective, this podcast equips you to discern truth in today's chaotic world. When Christianity intersects with everyday life, that's where you'll find Crosspoint, sometimes discussing the issues that some churches don't want to talk about. Look up Crosspoint with Mark Taylor wherever you get your podcast, produced by KNEO Radio and the Sky High Podcast Network.